Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Cul-de-sacs and fault lines. There's no shortage of either in today's Ukraine. The government in Kiev appears to be losing its ability to rule as international creditors grimly await the conditions of Ukraine's financial default. As rumored, is Washington now looking for a way out? To Crosstalk, the Ukrainian quagmire, I'm joined by my guest, Nebojsa Malic in Washington. He is a foreign affairs columnist as well as a news writer for RT America. In New York, we have Patrick Smith. He is a foreign affairs columnist for Salon and a former foreign correspondent. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He is the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want. Marcus, if I go to you first in London, I have a ledger I made up right before our recording here. And on one side of the ledger, I have the U.S. House of Representatives, and I have Russian media, like me, here at Crosstalk, okay? On the other side of the ledger, we have the Obama administration, Victoria Nuland. We have D.C., think tankers, academia, mass media. What do they disagree on? Well, can you guess? Go ahead.
Well, I think they disagree fundamentally on Ukraine's future, and I wouldn't sort of play too much into it that the Americans are starting to lose interest in Ukraine. There's been some talk at the Senate that the American government will no longer finance ultra-nationalist neo-Nazi groups operating in Ukraine. Well, I personally believe that happens to be a PR exercise, because the American government have been very clear about who have been operating in Ukraine for the last year and a half, as they've been very, very aware of the neo-Nazis which have been operating in the Baltic states. So I believe that's more of a PR exercise.
Can I jump in here, Marcus?
Ludicrous.
Can I jump in here, Marcus?
Patrick, go right ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It really does tell us something that in 2015 somebody has to produce an act of Congress saying we're no longer going to finance neo-fascists. I mean, is that supposed to be generous? At least they admit they are there. That is progress, huh?
Okay, Nebojsa, what do you think about that? Because
I would say that's progress as well.
Yeah, but I mean, in the scheme of things, go ahead. Go ahead in the scheme of things here, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Nebojsa. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's not going to amount to much, but as Marcos said, it is PR. On the other hand, so much in Washington is just PR that this is technically a tectonic shift. That there was an act of Congress saying there are Nazis in Ukraine. For the past year and more, there's been a constant chorus of voices in the Western press saying no Nazis, no Nazis. There's been no Nazis. This is democratic reformers. This is a democratic democracy, and these evil Russian aggressors are saying that there are Nazis. And they're inventing lies, and then you have you have a almost unanimous resolution in Congress saying, "Oh yeah, we're not funding Nazis anymore." Wait a second, that means you have been. That means an admission you have been. That means an admission that there have been Nazis. Paging Dr. Nuland. Paging Dr. Nuland.
Patrick, jump in. You want to jump in, Patrick?
I would like to go back to Peter's.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do. I want to go back to your original question, Peter. What do they disagree on? Here's what they disagree on, in my view. They disagree on who is responsible for this crisis, and they disagree on any notion of historical causality. The Russian side here is very coherent on the chronology and, let's say, the causality of this conflict. Okay, the Americans, Here's one example of what I mean. We announced that we are putting materiel and rotating troops in 6 frontline countries, right? The Russian president makes a remark about new plans for new nuclear missiles. No one over on this side can connect those two. It's just called loose rhetoric. Come off it. That's what they disagree on, responsibility.
Okay.
We must always keep that in mind.
I agree. Marcus, you know, it's interesting that Patrick brought up the whole issue of more deployments, military deployments from the United States into NATO countries on Russia's border. But the thing is that I find really interesting is looking at congressional testimony, what's called academic media, which I'm very suspect of, and just the mainstream here. And it almost gets down to is that it's calling someone's bluff, calling Putin's bluff. But if you look at what the Russian side has said, and I'm echoing what Patrick had to say here, it's very coherent during this entire crisis that was invented, that was brought to Ukraine. And the Russian side says, if you go over these lines, we will respond accordingly. And they've said it in a very calm way that their national security is first and foremost. But I don't think anybody really gets that in Washington. Go ahead, Marcus.
Peter.
Well, I think you're right, Peter.
Let me go to Marcus. Let me go to London first. Go ahead, Marcus, and we'll go to Patrick. Go ahead.
Well, I think, Peter, you're very right. There is a lot of bluff involved, but it's also very, very dangerous bluff as well. And I think the Americans have been looking for a pretext to take a very hard-line stance with Russia for the last 20 years or so. And 20 years have involved Ukraine, because the Americans have been seeking since 1991 to bring Ukraine into the West's orbit. And now that Ukraine has descended into chaos, of course, the Americans are going to blame Russia, and they are going to cite Ukraine as a pretext to redeploy their military forces in Eastern Europe, and possibly to redeploy intermediate nuclear missiles in Western Europe and also in Britain. So it's a very, very dangerous situation. And I'd just like to make it very clear once again that no one should be under an illusion that the Americans are starting to, quote, back off from Ukraine.
Okay.
Absolutely not. The Americans crossed over a red line in February 2014 when they instigated a Western-backed coup in Kiev. They have the advantage in Ukraine now. Yes, they're going to have to pay a lot of money to bring Ukraine into the West's orbit, but they believe that the return will be Ukraine in NATO, Ukraine in the European Union, and Russia encircled completely on its western borders.
Okay, there's a lot said
Marcus.
right there. We could make a whole week of programs on that. Patrick, go ahead, respond. Go ahead.
Marcus, I'm with you with one qualifier. What I am hearing from sources in Europe and Washington is the following. The Obama administration is extremely disappointed with what is going on in Kiev. You have popularity ratings of sort of 1.534% for these people. They are not performing. The corruption business is absolutely out of hand. They are passing laws with, quotation marks, zero implementation. And Washington has probably concluded that it's a bust working with these people, but they are stuck. Who else? I think you're quite right that the Americans have no intention of backing off here. But
Patrick,
I predicted
could I just say one thing,
in the end, they're
Patrick?
going to walk back with their, yeah.
Go ahead, Marcus, jump in, and then I want to go to Washington. Go ahead, Marcus, real quick. Go ahead.
If I could say one thing, Patrick, yes, I hear what you say, but the Americans have never abandoned Kosovo. Kosovo, in terms of organised crime, is a black hole in Europe, and yet the Americans will not abandon Kosovo. I mean, they have one of the largest military bases in the world in Kosovo,
disagree.
Camp Bondsteel. So I don't think they won't drop Kosovo, and they won't drop Ukraine. They've been working on Ukraine for 20 years, and effectively, in my opinion, they have captured Ukraine. Yes, they're going to have to pay a large amount, but yeah, I do hear what you're saying.
All right, I want to jump in here. Nabosha, you've been listening patiently. Weigh in, my friend. Go ahead.
Well, they won't drop either of these constructs. I wouldn't call them countries at this stage, but they can and will drop leadership. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if President Poroshenko was either, overthrown, discharged, impeached, or even assassinated. I mean, there's a rich history of Americans disposing of their allies when they were no longer useful. If the analysis that we've heard is correct, and I believe it is, then the problem with Kiev is that it's not that they're Nazis or that they're instigating a war with Russia. It's that they're very bad at it, that they're failing at it. So Washington is going to move ahead and find somebody who will be better at it, not understanding. And this is my second point that I really wanted to make, that things are not working the way they imagine them to work. This is not just a case of causality gone horribly wrong, but a massive, massive failure to communicate. People in Washington simply can't understand anybody else's perspective because they've been living in their own echo chamber for so long that they just cannot process outside input anymore.
Patrick, you know, it's groupthink. This is what it's gotten down. Yes, absolutely. You want to elaborate on that, Patrick? Go ahead.
Well, at this point, we are, and because of the absence of causal reasoning, okay, we are really entering into a phase, so far as I was thinking about it this morning as I walked over to the studio, it's becoming completely irrational. When you have the Americans saying Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, and leaving out, first of all, it is not aggression, and leaving out any idea of why Russia may be behaving as it is, it eliminates logical conversation. I feel rather badly for the Russian side in this. There's nobody to talk to. I'd like to make one other point about the Russian position on this. I don't care how unfashionable it is. President Putin has been, for my money, one of the calmer voices in this. I'll put Chancellor Merkel in the same file. But he has been one of the more responsible people, if you follow the line of his reasoning, his speeches, his occasional statements. I credit him. I don't give a damn what anybody on this side of the ocean thinks of what I just said.
Okay, Pat,
I stand by it.
I stand by those words as well. We're going to go to a short break, gents, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Ukraine. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the political and economic quagmire in Ukraine. Okay, Marcus, I'd like to go back to you in London. I just came back from St. Petersburg, the economic forum that they have every single year, and I hosted a panel on the new BRICS Development Bank. And I asked the presumptive new president what he would do differently than Western institutions like the IMF, and he told me we would follow the rules. Because the IMF breaks its own rules, particularly right now, or at least it seems to be on the path to, where it will fund a war that it should not be doing. It will continue funding, even if it defaults on its public debt and private debt. It will continue funding, which is against every single rule of the IMF. But there's nothing to stop the IMF from doing that. This is, again, going back to some of the things we've said earlier in this program about, you know, the sense of causality and direction of this thing here. Again, you break all the rules, you overthrow democratically elected governments, and then you break your own financial institution rules. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, I think that potential development on behalf of the BRICS sounds very promising. What we need is a new monetary organisation in the world which abides by the rules and also is ethical. The IMF is one of the most formidable weapons at Washington's disposal, and they have caused havoc, absolute destruction around the world. In regard to the former Yugoslavia, one of the major reasons why the former Yugoslavia descended into civil war was because of the IMF loans. Look what happened to Russia during the 1990s under the deplorable leadership of Boris Yeltsin. Russia was on an IMF lifeline, which was absolutely despicable. So yes, we do need a new financial organisation in the world. However, the Americans will very, very seriously oppose that, because they know that any challenge to the IMF ultimately is a challenge to American global hegemony. They won't like it, but we can only be hopeful, and the world will be somewhat of a better place with such a new organisation to oppose the dreadful IMF.
Okay. Patrick, you know, all through this program here, we all have similar points of view. Do you know that there are people that say that we're just mimicking and echoing propaganda? How do you react to that? Because there are regulators out there that say that's exactly what we do on this program. And I didn't brief anyone to come on this program here. You're speaking your mind, but people will still make that claim. How would you react to them? Go ahead.
I would say our failure, Peter, is that we are not mimicking propaganda. That's our failure, right? The press over here, one reason I am sitting here, the press over here has just absolutely collapsed in terms of its relationship, its servitude, let's say. I don't think the word is too strong anymore. I would have at one point. It's not now. They are craven. It's a disgrace. We are having this conversation. Impossible to have in the American media.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to put. I don't want to suggest that propaganda is an American invention. We just happen to indulge in a very great deal of it, and we're extremely powerful. Those two things in combination, and we are way over the top on this question. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Let me go to Nebojsa.
We have more need of it, let's say, than.
Okay, Nebojsa, let me go to you in Washington here. We have the defense secretary traveling through Europe right now and just demanding everybody in the NATO alliance to pay their fair share. Almost nobody wants to. I think Greece is one of the, believe it or not, Greece is one of the only countries doing it. I find that astounding here. And you know, if you look at the most recent Pew Global Research polls, I mean, most members of NATO don't really want to go to the aid of another NATO member vis-a-vis Russia, because a lot of people see through a lot of the propaganda, okay? I mean, this is one of the things that's very interesting here. I mean, you're in D.C., I'm outside of this bubble that you guys are bombarded with all of the time. I mean, how did they, you know, square the circle there, right there? I mean, if you just look at the data, I mean, I'm not particularly happy to see Germany rearm, okay? Just for historical reasons, okay? Go ahead.
Well, there's again two dynamics here at play. One is that if you look at the list of top 10 weapons manufacturers in the world, you'll find that most of them are American companies, and this whole call for, you know, more money for defense is basically more corporate welfare for American weapon makers in a nutshell. But the other thing is that we mentioned the BRICS Bank and the IMF. The mainstream political discourse in this town is essentially going back to the whole denial of causality. They're calling Russia and China and BRICS in general revisionist powers, and they're trying to tap into the whole interpretation of World War II as in, oh, there are these evil empires rising to disturb the world order. I'm sorry, but if you yourself are breaking the rules that you yourself have adopted and passed and instigated, you are the revisionist power.
Exactly.
And the people you're confronting, in this case Russia, China, BRICS, are the people trying to restore order. So really, who's the disruptive influence here, and who's the one trying to bring things into balance?
Can I just add something onto that?
Are we the bad guys?
No, that's really, Marcus, let me go back to London here. This is one of the interesting things, is because as these emerging powers emerge, by definition here, the West sees now, particularly the United States, is it might be held accountable for what it does in the world. And that scares the heck out of those people, because, you know, somebody must pay for the quote-unquote annexation of Crimea when the people of Crimea exercise self-determination. But who punishes Washington for the illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003? Nobody. But that day is coming. Go ahead.
And I think it's extremely important for people. I think it's extremely important for people watching this program to understand that while the West, led by America, is accusing Russia of redrawing the post-Cold War map of Europe, the reality is that it's the West that has done that. Who recognised the independence of Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia, which destroyed the sanctity of internationally recognised borders? They destroyed Yugoslavia. That was the first was the first area where they redrew the post-Cold War map of Europe. They then did again with Kosovo. They tore an integral part of Serbia away from a UN member whose borders are internationally recognised by all UN members in the world, and they proclaimed Kosovo as an independent country. No, Russia has not redrawn the post-Cold War map of Europe. It is the West that has done that, led by America. That is the truth.
Okay. Patrick.
Can I add something
Go ahead.
to what Marcus says?
Just jump in. That's the point of the program. Go ahead.
This may come over a little oddly, but we are talking about messes, we are talking about crises, we are talking about the prevalence of American power. In my view, taking the long perspective, I think things are actually going in the right direction. I think Washington's time is gradually, messily passing into the past. It will be one nation among others. I think that's what the entire rest of the planet is telling us. And I think we must never lose sight of what I view as the positive direction of events. Right? I do hold to that.
I see. Now, Patrick has an interesting point because over the last couple of years on this program, looking at these crises in the Middle East and now Ukraine, I always get the impression that in the halls of power, particularly in Washington, that people are in a hurry. They need to tie up all these loose ends because Russia, China, the BRICS, they're marching, revisionist or not, and they're marching in the right direction, I would say. And I think that really scares Washington. And they prefer this chaos around them because chaos works to their advantage, not to the people on the ground. The Boyce in Washington, go ahead.
Well, as Pepe Escobar is fond of saying, this is the empire of chaos. It thrives on chaos. It uses chaos. It abhors order. It is afraid of order, especially the order it itself created. How dare anybody else tell the Americans to obey the law? They are the law. And there's a definite whiff of desperation in Washington, I would say, based on the sheer inability of the U.S. to impose its will elsewhere. It can break things, it can kill a lot of people, but it can't force the world to do its bidding anymore. And that's got a lot of people in this town really scared.
Okay, Patrick, you want to jump in there? Go ahead.
You used a great word. You just used a great word. It's a position of desperation, and ultimately, such positions are not sustainable.
Okay.
Once again, we are in a dreadful mess. But I just urge those in this conversation and also viewers to consider the longer view here.
Yeah,
and not,
I agree.
lose heart.
I agree with that. But Marcus, I'll go back to you because this program, Crosstalk, we do a lot on Ukraine because this country where I live borders Ukraine. People that I work with at this television station have relatives in Ukraine, in the Donbass, and it's very emotional. It's very, very real. What's happening to those people there. Do you see, because it looks to me, and I'm going back to Marcus here in London, I'm very worried that Poroshenko's usefulness is very limited, particularly for people like Victoria Nuland. They will force him into another conflict that could even embroil more, not just the Donbass, but more of the country. I worry about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. The Ukrainian government is made up of numerous elements, and in my opinion, those elements, they are all despicable. But I think the least of the evil in the Ukrainian government, it is Petro Poroshenko. I think he's probably the only person in Kiev that President Putin and the rest of the Russian government can actually talk to. And I do wonder if his time is limited, and if he's replaced, if he's overthrown, we could have someone possibly connected to the right sector who could come to power and who would instigate a full-blown invasion of the Donbass. And in fact, right sector are putting pressure on Poroshenko to discard, to ignore Minsk II, and to actually invade Donetsk and Lugansk. So I'm no fan of Petro Poroshenko. He's got blood on his hands, but I think he's the only person the Russian government can actually talk to at the moment in Kiev.
Okay, Patrick, 10 seconds. 10 seconds, real
Marcus,
quick. Go ahead, 10 seconds.
They can talk to him only when the Americans or the Germans order him to talk to somebody. Otherwise, he won't talk to anybody. He's an incompetent kid.
All right, gentlemen, we will revisit Ukraine over and over again as long as this crisis lasts. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, New York, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules. I love you.